preserve it. We are NTD.
Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. The White House touts President Trump's federalization of D.C.'s police force, giving the latest arrest numbers, and Friday, President Trump heads to Alaska for a high-stakes meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. President Trump says he's considering green-lighting a major lawsuit against Fed Chair Jerome Powell, blasting the central bank over building renovations, while renewing his push for lower interest rates. European Union leaders plan to speak with President Trump ahead of his meeting with Russia's Vladimir Putin. What European officials say about the upcoming talks between the presidents. New U.S. inflation data has been released. We talked to an economist to break down the numbers for us. The Department of Homeland Security sees a surge in ICE applications. Incentives such as a $50,000 signing bonus are drawing new recruits.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. The latest inflation data is out. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, U.S. annual inflation was unchanged in July. Headline inflation number held steady at 2.7% for the second consecutive month. The rate comes in below economists' expectations. It suggests that President Trump's tariffs did not have a significant impact on consumer prices. Core inflation, which excludes volatile food and energy prices, climbed to 3.1% year over year, up from 2.9% in June. Wall Street was relieved following the July inflation data. Dow Jones and the Nasdaq both rose slightly before the opening bell. President Trump today reiterated his call for the Federal Reserve to lower benchmark interest rates. The president cited renovations of the central bank's buildings. In another post, Trump said tariffs are generating trillions of dollars for the U.S. economy without fueling inflation. The president criticized Goldman Sachs and its CEO, David Solomon, for their negative predictions. And China and the U.S. will continue trade negotiations. President Trump has granted a 90-day extension to China with only hours to spare before the deadline. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on the executive order Trump signed to allow trade talks to move forward.
Trump wrote that all other elements of the agreement will remain the same. Both sides had floated the idea of extending the deal to allow for further talks since a two-day meeting in Stockholm in late July. The United States and China engaged in near-embargo tariffs earlier this year. The U.S. imposed 145% levies on Chinese goods entering the country, while Beijing countered with 125% retaliatory tariffs. Since then, the U.S. has lowered its rate to 30%, while China has reduced it to 10%. In other Trump administration news, the president said he held a very interesting meeting with Intel CEO Lip-Bu Tan yesterday. The sit-down took place just days after he called for Tan's resignation over his alleged ties to Chinese companies with military backgrounds. Trump wrote on Truth Social that he met with Tan along with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Trump described Tan's success as an amazing story and said Tan will work with cabinet members to come up with suggestions for the president during the next week. Tan took the reins of Intel in March as the embattled chipmaker tries to regain territory from its competitors. Trump on August 7th called for Tan's immediate resignation. This after Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Tom Cotton raised concerns over Tan's history of investing in Chinese companies, including those with alleged ties to the People's Liberation Army. In response, Tan said he fully shares the president's commitment to advancing U.S. national and economic security. The executive says there's been a lot of misinformation about his past roles and that Intel is engaging with the administration to make sure they have the facts. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
NVIDIA is rejecting claims made by a Chinese state-affiliated social media account. It recently urged companies to avoid buying NVIDIA's H20 graphics processing units, claiming there is a backdoor feature embedded in the chips. The account claimed this alleged backdoor could enable remote shutdown, which would allow NVIDIA to remotely access and disable the chips. It also alleged the chips to have a licensing locking function that could render them invalid, as well as a tracking and positioning feature. The account, which had previously appeared on China's Defense Ministry website, advised Chinese companies not to buy NVIDIA's H20 chips, claiming they're not safe for China. An NVIDIA spokesperson had denied that its chips had backdoors. This is the third time in a month that NVIDIA refuted China's allegations about a backdoor feature. U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro, along with ICE and state officials, is holding a press conference to announce the indictment of Haitian gang leader Jimmy Barbecue Cherizier. Take a look.
Many campaigns of violence against Haitians in Haiti, including the notorious La Saline attack in 2018. Notorious because he both planned and participated in the killing of approximately 71 Haitians. It is a turf war that has shocked the human rights activists in the world. His co-defendant, Basile Richardson, grew up in Haiti with Cherizier. He is a naturalized U.S. citizen who is living in North Carolina. He was also indicted under that same one count, and he is indicted for sending money to Cherizier, sending money from the Haitian diaspora in the United States to Cherizier. And knowing that Cherizier was sanctioned under that 2020 Magnitsky Act. Now, apparently, a trucker who, although he was from North Carolina, was just picked up in Texas. Now, one of the things that is extremely important that you'll be hearing about from my law enforcement partners here is that the State Department has designated a $5 million reward for information leading to the arrest and or conviction of Cherizier. Now, I want to let the public know that anyone who is giving money to Cherizier, also known as Barbecue because of his violent acts in his home country, cannot say, I didn't know that he was sanctioned by the U.S. government. They will be prosecuted, and we will find them because they are supporting an individual who is committing human rights abuses, and we will not look the other way. Now, this office is not unfamiliar with crimes of violence in Haiti. Several months ago, we got a conviction against an individual by the name of Jolie German, who was involved in the kidnapping of 16 American Christian missionaries in Haiti. Haiti is a hot spot right now, and I don't use that as a pun on words, but there is incredible violence going on there, which is why the State Department has gotten involved and why we have made the decision to make it very clear under the Magnitsky Act that we're coming after you if you give money to Cherizier. Now, I'd like now to call upon my partners, Acting Assistant Director of the FBI, Darren Cox.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Darren Cox. I'm the Acting Assistant Director of the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division. I want to thank our partners here with us today and our international partners for their hard work and partnership in combating transnational organized crime, which threatens the safety and security of communities both in the United States and abroad. Under Director Patel's leadership, the FBI is focused more than ever on crushing violent crime, cartels, and gang activity every single day. Since January, the FBI, with the help of our law enforcement partners and community members, have arrested 3 top 10 fugitives. We've arrested over 19,000 criminals, and we've seized thousands of tons of narcotics, which have saved millions of lives across the United States. The American public and criminals should know Our agents and our partners are using every tool available to put criminals behind bars and keep America safe, and we will not stop. We stand shoulder to shoulder with the men and women of law enforcement, backing good cops. Without hesitation, they're taking the fight directly to the criminals, and they're restoring order. These efforts are a deliberate and coordinated plan to protect our communities and confront escalating threats from foreign terrorist organizations like Viva Unsoon and its associates. Tackling these networks means addressing every link in the chain, every cell, especially in the United States. As you've heard in today's announcement, that includes a $5 million reward for key members of Viva Unsoon and Jimmy Shazir, also known as Barbecue. We know someone has information that can help end this violence, and we want them to come forward and know that they are safe in doing so. Today, I want to highlight the amazing work the FBI and our law enforcement partners do every day to disrupt and dismantle violent criminal networks, just like that of Barbecue and his cronies. Our FBI Miami office has worked closely with our international partners to track down Shazir and his Viva Unsoon partners and associates in the United States. On July 23rd, one of Shazir's most trusted associates and a named co-conspirator was taken into custody. Brazier Richardson was investigated by Miami, and he was arrested by our FBI Houston office without incident. Violent actors like Shazir and the rest of his criminal associates must understand there is no safe haven for them and the people like them that traffic violence in our communities. The FBI and our partners will continue to leverage all of the resources available and the expertise that we have to bring these people to justice. We urge anybody with information related to Shazir or any of his criminal network to contact the FBI through our tips line or our local field office. You can also call 1-800-FBI, and you can go online to fbi.gov/tips. Together, we will stop this violence. Thank you.
That was a press conference by U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro and the FBI announcing the indictment of Jimmy Barbecue Jarizie, who is a gang member from Haiti. And the FBI is urging anyone with information to come out and provide it to the FBI, saying that they will be safe and that the FBI will not tolerate trafficking of violence in the U.S. Okay, moving on. The White House highlights the achievement of President Trump's federalization of the D.C. police force. Here's what White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said at the press briefing today.
Last night, approximately 850 officers and agents were surged across the city. They made a total of 23 arrests, including multiple other contacts. Last night, these arrests consisted of homicide, firearms offenses, possession with intent to distribute narcotics, fare evasion, lewd acts, stalking, possession of a high-capacity magazine, fleeing to elude in a vehicle, no permits, driving under the influence, reckless driving, and a bench warrant. A total of 6 illegal handguns were seized off of District of Columbia streets as part of last night's effort.
President Trump will travel to Anchorage, Alaska on Friday to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin. The White House is working on the logistics of the meeting with their Russian counterparts. Leavitt says Trump hopes to have a trilateral meeting that includes Ukraine soon. And the president may also visit Russia one day.
President Trump is determined to try and end this war and stop the killing. As the president has said over and over again, his strong preference will always be for peace and partnership whenever those outcomes can possibly be achieved. There is no leader in the world right now who has been more committed to preventing wars or ending them than President Donald Trump.
The White House says the goal of the meeting is for Trump to walk away with a better understanding of how to end the war. And joining us now to discuss U.S. peace efforts regarding the Russia-Ukraine war is Mike Leon, Director of Strategy at the Free and Equal Elections Foundation and host of the Can We Please Talk podcast. And also joining us is retired Lieutenant Colonel Darren Gobb, Black Hawk helicopter pilot and former battalion commander in the U.S. Army, and author of the book Veritas Vincit. So good afternoon to you both. Colonel Gobb, I'll start with you today. So as you're already aware, Trump is going to meet Putin in just a few days. What's your read on Russia's sudden advance in Ukraine before the meeting? Does President Putin stand to gain anything by that, by doing this ahead of negotiations?
Yeah, hey, good afternoon. I think there is a very good chance that Putin does see himself having the strategic advantage in eastern Ukraine and Crimea specifically, as well as the strategic decisions surrounding who owns the Crimea ultimately, as well as partnership in NATO for Ukraine, which is something that are red lines for him, that he's said, you know, Ukraine cannot be in NATO. But he's also said that at this point, with what he's invested, that he will not stop until they achieved all their objectives. And for him to be able to stay, he's willing to meet with Trump in Alaska at this point means largely that he's probably achieved most of those strategic objectives, or he's extremely close, which from my reading what's going on in eastern Ukraine looks like he probably has, because they have the upper hand right now. And the only thing stopping them from moving forward, frankly, right now is themselves.
Okay, Mike, what do you think? What are you looking at ahead of this meeting?
Well, first off, good to see everybody on this afternoon. You know, this has been something, I think, Don, that has kind of gone a little bit on the back burner, obviously, with Israel's new plan for Gaza City and with respect to geopolitics and the different wars that President Trump has been trying to put out and people coming in the Oval Office. I think we've lost sight of this Russia-Ukraine war. You know, 6,300 drones Russia launched into Ukraine in July of just this year, a 16% increase from June. So there has been offensives that Russia has continued to carry out on Ukraine. There's been mixed messages from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Obviously, we all saw about what happened in the Oval Office between Zelensky and everybody, but we're months away from that. But then the president also said, you know, if you recall, in a conference that he had, I want to say about 3 weeks ago, he said, you know, I spoke to Vladimir, great call. And then Melania tells me that another city is blown up, right? So he understands the gravity of this situation. He understands how Russia is advancing. I'm very, I don't want to use the word excited, but I am excited to hear how these talks come together. I'm excited that I heard today in that press briefing that it's a trilateral call. Maybe they'll have Zelensky conference in. They're still trying to work on those details because you have to include Zelensky in these negotiations. Everybody on the GOP side, if you recall, Don, back in the day in 2023 going into 2024, said that in order to end this war, there has to be some land concessions. Well, if there has to be land concessions in the Ukraine's constitution, you can't do that right now, right? So Zelensky has to be included in these talks. We have to figure out a way to peace, a sustainable way to peace. But again, Putin broke peace when he negotiated that deal that with Angela Merkel and Macron and Zelensky back in, I believe it was 2019. So I don't know how this ends, but I'm actually interested to see that Putin and Trump are actually meeting on American soil in Alaska, something the previous administration didn't do. And I do want to see an end to this war finally.
So building on what Mike is saying, Colonel Gobb, how is Trump supposed to thread the needle here? What leverage does Washington hold over Kyiv and Moscow?
Yeah, that's one of the greatest challenges right now, is that because Washington doesn't have a lot of leverage over Moscow or Kyiv, but mostly over Moscow they don't, because they being Moscow have built a plan around this war having to happen at some point, and it did. What they did was create a different circle of alliances. They built gold reserves. They built an economy that was. They planned on having largely being immune from American sanctions and Western sanctions in general, and the ability to sell energy through proxy. So that leverage, though there to a point, has not been effective. And the threat of sanctions against secondary power or secondary nations like India could have some influence on what happens. But, you know, like Mike said, this is hard to do, and this is. You know, simply ending the war in 24 hours, as Trump said at one point, was always going to be unrealistic, but you've got to keep trying. And this is a good sign that they're going to meet in person, because it means that the conditions that have been working through the junior staff members across the State Department and multiple other agencies have been met well enough that both sides think it's worth doing.
So, Mike, if no deal is reached, perhaps you think a deal could be reached, but what happens if a deal is not reached? What can we expect from Putin, from Trump, from Zelensky?
Well, I don't think we'll see a deal, obviously, on Friday. I mean, if it does, I mean, President Trump will be carrying that for the next 6 months. You won't hear anything about any other topic about ending this war that has gone on for 3 years and that his predecessor couldn't end. But back to Darren's point, and I agree with it a lot, is that diplomacy is the best way to try to resolve this. You know, when I've spoken to former Obama State Department officials that were working during the 2014 annexation of Crimea, right? And my biggest contention with them has always been the pushback is like, how do you negotiate with Russia? How do you negotiate with, you know, for all intent and purpose, a dictator, a former KGB officer who wants to reunify the Soviet Union? That's always been his plan, right? So he hasn't made any bones about that. How do you negotiate with that? And I think the first thing that the Trump administration did when they came in, and I've stated this on this network as well, is this policy change that Rich Grinnell even mentioned, is that we're actually going to go talk to Russia. And that's why you saw Marco Rubio meet in Saudi Arabia with Sergei Lavrov and the Russian delegation there. So I don't expect any deal, but what I do expect is that finally the two leaders of this conflict, and hopefully the third one, specifically the third one that got invaded, will all be a part of this call to actually talk about the particulars of all of this, because at the end of the day, this really involves the land that has already been that is currently under Russian control right now, and whether or not that will stay and remain, because that's the only way we're actually going to get a solution for this. Because like I mentioned before, when we did have a pseudo ceasefire that was put in place by some of these other countries with Russia and Ukraine, Vladimir Putin broke that because he felt like he was being infringed upon with respect to NATO. So how we have everlasting peace over there, it's a very complex answer. I don't have the answers. I don't know if Darren has the answers. He's got the military solutions potentially, but it's such an involved process. The only good that I see so far, Don, is that President Trump is getting on a plane and he's meeting with the other person involved in this face to face, like Darren said. This is not through the secondary delegates that are going out there. This is leader to leader. Let's figure out how we end this. And I think that could finally give us a timetable as to where this war could potentially end.
Okay, Colonel, maybe you can comment on what Mike said. How do we have long-term peace?
Yeah, I will tell you that I've lived all over Eastern Europe. I've served in many of these countries in varying capacities, not only military, but worked with them diplomatically as well. There is a lot of bad blood going back hundreds of years between Russia, Ukraine, and other nations in the Middle East. Extraordinarily complicated to put all the pieces together, to understand the history, and for people to be able to maybe put on the shelf some of these animosities for the sake of a lasting peace. Is it possible? Anything is always possible, and it's always worth trying. But to get there is not going to be easy. I agree with Mike. You're not going to see a deal this Friday. Perfectly happy to be surprised, but I think this is just the first of more than one meeting that's going to happen to get that in place. Lasting peace, I would hope to see economic ties that can lift everybody up and avoid the military ties that put everybody in a place of suspecting everybody else, and then we end up back here again.
Okay, Mike, so you said earlier that perhaps Zelensky could be brought into the negotiations on Friday. So originally, I think he wasn't supposed to attend. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Does the current negotiation framework treat Russia and Ukraine equally? Does it appear to favor one side more?
Yeah, Don, I mean, this is the overarching question. This is what I was talking about with respect to some of the mixed messages out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. It was really, like, we all saw what happened, you know, back in whatever month that was. I think it was in March with Zelensky visiting here in Washington, D.C. But now in the subsequent months, we've also seen Donald Trump come out with some pretty harsh statements about Vladimir Putin and feeling that he's been betrayed or tricked, or I don't want to mince his words, with respect to Vladimir Putin. So that kind of mixed messaging has caused, I mean, it would naturally cause unease with folks that live in Ukraine, because we were, under the previous administration, helping with Ukraine's weapons supply, right? And so I think my hope is that he's not treating both as equal. I think that's the part of this that, to Darren's point, with respect to the bad blood and the tensions, like all things are not equal with respect to this region. If we just take the 30,000-foot overview that Ukraine was a sovereign country and back in February of 2022, they were invaded. If we don't have that approach, if the president doesn't have that approach, because as he has said in that meeting with Zelensky, he has said, you know, well, both actors here and things like that. He's tried to dance that line. When you meet with the leader of Russia in person, my hope is that the talk is a little bit tougher, but tougher in respect that it gets to somewhere with respect to peace. And I don't think we achieve any of that if we don't have some of the disputes already of the land that's already been acquired by Russia that's currently under Russian control. I just don't know how you get past some of that, especially after a war that's killed over, reports are saying anywhere between 500,000 to 1 million with respect to soldiers and obviously civilians that have been killed. So I just don't know how we do all of that, but I would like the president to not weight both of these things equally. I don't weight Vladimir Putin and what he has done to Russia as equal as Zelensky and Ukraine. But again, I think Donald Trump, the biggest thing that I can give credit for, and a lot of people won't give him credit for this, I'll give him credit for it. He's going on a plane to Alaska to meet with the leader of Russia and talk to him face to face. That is one of the most important steps to potentially having peace and potentially having some type of, even if it's short term, a framework of the next 6 months of we have a ceasefire type deal in place, even if it's something that's a temporary Band-Aid, at least we would have that closure because he got on that plane and went to meet Vladimir Putin face to face.
All right, we just have time for one more comment. Darren, if you have any final thoughts.
Yeah, I think the last thing that I guess to make that Band-Aid stick and move forward a lot longer would be to get the European nations that are part of NATO with us to be part of that message that peace through strength, again, it counts, it does work. And there's been some mixed messaging out of nations' capitals throughout Europe as well. Not saying that we're ever going to get that perfect, but it'd be nice if we could end this thing knowing that we come out of it NATO unified and not NATO divided.
Well, all right, Colonel Gobb, Mike, thank you very much for coming on today.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Coming up, the Department of Homeland Security sees a surge in ICE applications. Incentives such as a $50,000 signing bonus are drawing new recruits. Stay tuned.
Save big at Mathis Home with Labor Day deals in every department. Check out their new arrivals and save big on the latest living rooms. This reclining sofa is a great example of their unbeatable prices. It's just $449. Where else can you find a sofa with 2 built-in recliners for just $449? With their incredible selection, you're sure to find the sofa just right for you. Plus, they're all in stock, so you can take it home today or get it delivered absolutely free. Hurry in, these deals won't last long. Now through Labor Day, only at Mathis Home.
Discover the ancient secret to vitality and longevity with Puretang Black Ginseng. Crafted from premium 6-year-old Korean ginseng, each root is carefully nurtured for over 2,260 days, undergoing a traditional 9-round handcrafted process of steaming and drying to unlock full potency and absorption. Experience pure, natural energy with Puretang Black Ginseng. Order now at puretang.com.
Immigration and Customs Enforcement is seeing a surge of new applicants. The Department of Homeland Security says ICE has received over 100,000 applications since the end of last month. DHS is providing a variety of incentives to increase the ranks in ICE. Perks include a $50,000 signing bonus, student loan forgiveness, and retirement benefits, among others. ICE has waived age limits, though applicants must still complete medical and drug screening as well as a physical fitness test. The Texas legislative stalemate has yet to be resolved. Members of the Texas House of Representatives were once again unable to reach a quorum today. This comes after Democrats fled the state last week in order to hinder a Republican-led redistricting effort. That effort could potentially result in another 5 U.S. House seats during the 2026 midterms. Texas House Speaker Dustin Burrows also blamed fellow Democrats for holding up critical funding in the wake of devastating flooding in Texas.
Members, may I have your attention? Those bills are set to be on the floor tomorrow. And I know those of us present are eager to take action on them. The only thing standing between Texas and real disaster relief is whether our absent colleagues decide to show up tomorrow.
Texas legislators are set to meet again on Friday. If there's still no quorum, the session will be adjourned. Governor Abbott will immediately issue a proclamation for a second called special session. Absent lawmakers are subject to a fine of $500 a day. Senator John Cornyn said he's asked the FBI to help state law enforcement to track down the absent Democratic legislators. Elections are at stake as the Democratic National Committee gears up to protest GOP redistricting plans. To fight the Trump takeover, demonstrations are planned across 20 states on Saturday. The DNC will be joined by over 35 groups. More than 50 events are planned. The main event is a gathering in Austin, Texas. The protest will be centered on the future of our democracy. Some other groups involved in the protest are Planned Parenthood, the Texas AFL-CIO, Move On, and Indivisible. As demonstrators descend on Texas, Democratic state legislators are still staying out of the Lone Star State. The aim is to stop Republicans from having a necessary quorum to move forward with redistricting plans. 5 seats in the U.S. House are at stake. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has tapped Republican State Senator Jay Collins to be his next lieutenant governor. DeSantis, a 2-term governor, can't run for re-election in 2026. Here's what DeSantis had to say about his pick.
Voters know, hey, this is a guy that I believe in. This guy I can count on, and that's not usually what gets circulated at some of these elections. And so, I think that his political success was really a reflection of what he had done throughout his life and putting service before self. And then obviously he's gotten in and he's delivered big results for people. And so those were very well votes cast.
Collins was sworn in minutes after the announcement for a seat that had been vacant since February. If Collins decides to launch a gubernatorial bid to succeed DeSantis, he'll be facing fellow Republican competition. President Donald Trump has already endorsed Florida Representative Brian Donalds for the governor's office. President Trump has picked a new head for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. He says he's nominating economist E.J. Antony as commissioner. Antony is the chief economist at the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, and has previously taught university courses on labor economics, money, and banking. Trump fired the agency's previous commissioner, Erica McEntaffer, earlier this month, alleging she manipulated data for political reasons. In his announcement, Trump said Antony will ensure economic numbers are honest and accurate. If confirmed by the Senate, Antony will lead an agency of more than 2,000 employees. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has faced scrutiny over data revisions, including the largest 2-month change to job numbers since 1979 outside the pandemic. Walmart will pay $5.6 million to settle a consumer protection lawsuit in California. The retailer was accused of overcharging customers by selling items like baked goods that weighed less than the amounts written on the label, according to the Santa Clara County DA's office. The civil complaint also said Walmart charged customers more than their posted or lowest advertised price. These actions are in violation of California's false advertising and unfair competition laws. The latest inflation data is out. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, U.S. annual inflation was unchanged in July. Headline inflation held steady at 2.7% for the second consecutive month. The rate comes in below economists' expectations. It suggests that President Trump's tariffs did not have a significant impact on consumer prices. Core inflation, which excludes volatile food and energy prices, climbed to 3.1% year over year, up from 2.9% in June. Wall Street was relieved following the July inflation data. Dow Jones and the Nasdaq both rose slightly before the opening bell. And joining us now to discuss the latest inflation data is Daniel Lacalle, chief economist at Tressis and author of the book Freedom or Equality. Good to see you again, Daniel. So you've said many times on the program that tariffs don't feed to consumer prices. So do you consider this latest inflation report proof of that with the consumer price index reading coming in slightly cooler than expected.
Hi, Don. I completely agree. I mean, the latest figures show that there is absolutely no impact on any of the items of tariffs allegedly creating inflationary pressures. What we have seen in the July figures is very interesting because if you compare it with the September or October figures, both on a core level at each of the items from food at home to energy to all the different parts that make the average basket of any citizen, what we can see is that there is absolutely zero inflationary impact from tariffs. In fact, what is absolutely evident in the figures is that inflation in July is actually a lot cooler than what it was in September or October when the Federal Reserve was stating that inflation was at a sufficiently low level to cut rates. So again, it's evidence that tariffs are not feeding into inflation. It's evidence that inflation is under control. Furthermore, it's also important to see how items such as energy and such as gas and utilities, all of those are improving.
Yeah, I mean, just building on what you said, Daniel, some of the items are actually lower. The inflation actually slowed in the CPI report. But can you break down the numbers for us for core inflation? July's reading rose apparently at its fastest annual pace in 5 months. Can you break it down for us?
Well, actually, if you think about it, the core inflation at 0.3% was actually in line with what we saw in terms of core inflation in September or October. In fact, core inflation is lower than in September or October on an annualized level. What matters for people that try to use the fear-mongering on tariffs is the month-on-month inflation. Obviously, the annualized inflation includes a lot of months of the previous administration's work and certainly policies. No? So what we need to understand, for example, is that food at home is down, that prices of energy, of utilities, electricity, so many of the items that we purchase on a day-to-day basis are actually down on a month-on-month basis. And if we look at core prices, month-on-month, every month since the beginning of what I call the tariff tantrum, the evidence is that inflation is actually below the pre-tariff period average.
Okay, can we also talk about the Federal Reserve? Because Jerome Powell has previously said that the reason why he's not cutting rates, or rather delaying the rate cuts, is because he's worried that inflation, or rather tariffs, could fuel inflation. What are your thoughts on that? Does central bank policy, monetary policy, have an impact on whether tariffs increase prices and whether it can lower those prices?
The Federal Reserve cannot say on the one hand that they're data dependent and on the other hand not be data dependent. That is, the constant messages of contradiction coming from the Federal Reserve are unacceptable. First, if they were waiting for the impact of tariffs on inflation, by now they have 6 consecutive months in which the figures show that there is no inflationary pressure. Second, if they are following their objectives and their targets and their mandate, they should be looking at employment and they should be looking at inflation. None of those suggest that they need to hold rates. In fact, with the latest revisions of employment figures, what has been proven is that they had to cut rates faster earlier. Although the job creation has been robust in the private sector and has been strong in nationals and US-born citizens, all of those elements are not enough to make small businesses hire faster. And definitely small businesses and families are suffering from a completely erroneous monetary policy coming from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve actually publishes a beige book every month in which they show how the economy is doing. Well, if you read the beige book, they should have reduced rates, they should have cut rates much faster and earlier.
Okay, which of the two mandates that the Federal Reserve focuses on, which one of those two should they put a heavier weight on right now currently? Employment or price stability?
Well, obviously, they're not putting any weight on any of them. They're putting an enormous weight on what they believe may happen if their models, which have always been wrong, let's remember that, if their models worked. The problem with the Federal Reserve is that they have 24,000 people holding on to the results of models that failed in 2021 and are failing in 2025. So if we look at their mandate is full employment and price stability. So it makes no sense to keep rates untouched the way that they're doing, and it makes an enormous harm on businesses and families when the employment figures have been revised the way that they have, and the beige book itself was already mentioning the slowdown in job creation, and at the same time, inflationary pressures are non-existent. Therefore, the Federal Reserve is actually not complying with any of its mandates, and it's not being data dependent. The Federal Reserve needs to cut rates because rates right now are higher than where they would be if they were floating freely instead of being imposed by a central bank.
So essentially, you're saying the current benchmark interest rate from the Fed is too restrictive, with it being over 4% and inflation averaging around 2 to 3%.
Absolutely. And if you look at what the Federal Reserve members say themselves, they admit that interest rates right now are above the neutral rate. When interest rates are above the neutral rate, it's unnecessarily penalizing small businesses and families in particular. And let's remember that the Fed's misguided policies hurt families on the way of expansion by creating an enormous level of inflation. And now that they are stubbornly waiting for the models to work, they are actually penalizing families and businesses with elevated rates. This is not acceptable, because we must remember that the difference of 50 basis points, 100 basis points in the Fed funds rate is an enormous difference on a mortgage or on a credit card loan.
Okay, just one last question, and I noticed this when looking at the core CPI numbers. It seems like it was services that was driving the inflation, the core inflation. Do you think that's going to make it core inflation harder to come down? Is services inflation stickier than goods inflation?
No, I think that's simply the year-on-year effect. We had a level of services inflation in July last year that looked allegedly more benign, and it's simply basically the transition effect to the year-on-year new figure. But I don't think that there's a big challenge. The services part is a little bit more volatile. And I think that what we are likely to see is a stabilization in the level of services inflation. In any case, services inflation is very, very low, and below the levels where it was in September or October, when the Fed was very happy to cut rates.
Well, okay, Daniel, it's always good to talk to you. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Coming up, we're going to take a short break, but don't go anywhere. We'll be back with more news. Stay tuned.
I was a quarterback at Hardaway High School. College first-round draft pick, on and off the field. We were taught to not show any signs of weakness. During the football season, I would stop eating. But I didn't know I was depressed. I thought that something was wrong with me. For 20 plus years was physical. We didn't have any education behind what mental health was. I started to learn it starts here first. If this is together, I'll be better as a father, as a man, and as a husband. Put the importance on your mental health. I'm not scared to talk about it anymore. The first tool is therapy. The second one is positive self-talk. And then journaling, putting your thoughts on paper. We have to redefine what being a strong man is and heal, love your mind.
There is a road laid out for me.
Boxes everywhere. And this is gonna be Addie's room.
I am blind,
you're really gonna like it.
I hope so. Yeah. I know this road is there for me. There is a long way.
First night here, but Amy seems cool.
Waist down by the river. I am blind, but I need not see.
I got this.
I know this road is there for me.
Okay.
If I'm really free, take me down to the river and wash me.
Hi, I'm Ryan Blaney, a third-generation race car driver, and we dedicate a lot of our time to going as fast as possible. My grandpa Lou is the reason why my dad and I started racing, and I'm really proud to follow in his tracks. But when my grandpa was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, it was a very unexpected bump in the road for us. I've learned a lot on this journey with my grandpa Lou, and the memories of my grandpa will always be with me. And in our family, we're used to getting involved, and I encourage you to do the same, especially when it comes to caring for your loved ones. When I think about Alzheimer's and the impact it had on my family, I recognize that losing a race isn't such a bad day after all. It's important to notice if older family members are acting differently, experiencing problems with their memory, or having trouble with routine tasks. Talking about Alzheimer's can be really tough, but if you notice something, have a conversation with your loved one. Encourage them to see a doctor or offer to go with them. Early detection of Alzheimer's can give your family time to explore support services, make a plan for the future, and access available treatments. If you or your family are noticing changes, it could be Alzheimer's. Talk about seeing a doctor together.
As federal law enforcement take control of Washington, D.C. at President Trump's direction, reactions were quick to pour in. Republicans on Capitol Hill were quick to support the action. House Speaker Mike Johnson describing it as an effort to clean up Washington, end the crime wave, and restore the beauty of the greatest capital in the world. House Oversight Chairman James Comer is planning a September hearing with Washington, D.C., Mayor Muriel Bowser, and other district officials. The chairman noting the committee's constitutional duty to oversee D.C. Democrats, meanwhile, pushed back. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said there is no basis for a federal takeover of D.C. And Democrat Senate Leader Chuck Schumer described the move as a political ploy and attempted distraction. President Trump plans to expand the federal law enforcement directive into other high-crime cities like Chicago. Homelessness and violent crime are the focus of some recent moves by the Trump administration. President Trump yesterday vowed to move homeless encampments out of D.C. parks while announcing a federal takeover of police force and an executive order as well. And into long-term institutional settings by using civil commitment to restore public order. NTD's Daniel Monahan spoke with a certified addiction professional for analysis of the president's plans.
Civil commitment means a court ordering someone into treatment for mental health or substance abuse issues. It usually happens when a person is deemed a danger to themselves or others. Master Certified Addiction Professional John Pulse says when the deinstitutionalization movement was started in around 1965 under JFK, the plan was to remove a very large population of people that had been in long-term state institutions and integrate them back into the community.
Unfortunately, those support services that were supposedly going to be in place to help those people didn't exist. And also, there simply were people that really needed to be in that institutional setting that because of a mass closure of institutions were no longer able to. So in short, there are many people that are chronically experiencing homelessness with severe mental illness that should be institutionalized and often will not go willingly.
Pulse says to implement Trump's order effectively, the first step would be to actually have ethical, safe institutions for these individuals to go to.
The idea of the executive order, in theory, is a good one overall, but my response to that is, where are they going to go? You know, there's been a massive closure of state hospitals. There simply aren't enough beds. So the first thing to do would be to make sure that there are actually institutions that are available. And then after that, there should still be some type of due process involved in terms of initiating an involuntary commitment. So in Florida, we have the Baker Act, which can be initiated by a clinician, law enforcement, or a judge.
Prior to the deinstitutionalization, over 500,000 people in the United States were in long-term institutions. Now that number is around 30 to 40,000. Pulse says once you sort out where people will be housed and treated, there's a way that you can implement what he calls compassionate involuntary commitment.
There's a point at which somebody does not possess the insight to get help. And if they don't possess the insight to get help, and they have no recognition that they're having a problem, to expect them to just one day be like, wow, I have mental health issues, I'll go get help. That's just not going to happen. So the compassionate thing to do is what we call treatment over objection.
A major concern about institutions is past stories of rampant abuse of people housed there.
There would need to be oversight by state and local governments, accreditation organizations. For example, in Florida, the Department of Children and Family Services would need to certify and accredit and monitor these organizations to make sure that standards are being upheld.
President Trump's order says tens of billions of dollars have been spent on failed programs that address homelessness, but not its root causes, leaving other citizens vulnerable to public safety threats.
Harm reduction alone, a Housing First initiative without adequate services and without the person being stable enough to even be in the housing, is not going to be effective. So I don't believe that the best path would be to eliminate harm reduction and housing initiatives altogether, but that person has to be stable enough to even participate in programming like that. And often the only way to do that is through civil commitment and at times forced medication.
Pulse says early intervention is key when people have severe mental health issues as they progressively get worse over time. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
After President Trump took control of D.C.'s police department, he vowed to address crime policies nationwide. The president is urging Congress to pass legislation to outlaw cashless bail. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has more about this push.
President Trump is directing lawmakers in Congress to write up and pass a bill that would override local laws that let defendants get released from jail before their trial without having to pay any money. This type of policy is usually referred to as no cash bail or cashless bail. These policies can be found in cities like Chicago and New York. There are other areas also moving to enact cashless bail. Now, President Trump said every place in the country where you have no cash bail is a disaster, he says, leading Congresswoman Elise Stefanik from New York to quickly announce that she wants to be the one to write up and lead this bill through Congress. Here's Stefanik.
President Trump is exactly correct that we need to address the crime crisis and the leadership that he's bringing to D.C. I'm looking forward to introducing legislation to end failed bail reform so that we can save New York.
New York's current governor, Kathy Hochul, pushed back on this, saying that they've made changes to the 2019 law, which gives judges more discretion on whether to even give the option for suspects to be released. Now, other city leaders are echoing the New York governor's point, saying that their approach to crime reduction is working, so federal action isn't needed. Here's Baltimore City Mayor.
The reality is no mayor is out here saying that we don't have to deal with crime. We have the fewest amount of homicides through this date on record. That's 50 years, a 50-year low.
Now that we see Democrat leaders across the nation pushing back on this proposed legislation even before it's been written or introduced in Congress, the question is how many Democrats would support the GOP's no cash bail bill once it does come to the floor. President Trump said he's relying on Republican votes, but the Senate would need some Democrats since most legislation usually needs 60 votes to get it through the chamber unless Republicans squeeze this policy into a second reconciliation bill that could pass with a simple majority. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
A spectacular moment during a storm in South Carolina, all caught on camera. A police officer's dash cam captured footage of a dramatic lightning strike. The Mount Pleasant police cruiser and other drivers on Highway 17 saw a bolt hit a utility pole yesterday, sending a fireball into the air and sparking power lines. No one was hurt, but the strike knocked down power lines and caused outages. Highway traffic was shut down in both directions for several hours while crews cleared the scene. Police posted the video on Facebook, accompanied by AC/DC's 1990 hit Thunderstruck, calling it a bit too much excitement for a Monday. Commenters compared the scene to a Hollywood blockbuster, with one person saying, quote, "What in the Armageddon is going on over here?" Up next, two Texas Democratic congressmen have signaled they're willing to compete against each other in the newly proposed Texas congressional map. We have that and more after the break.
Hi, I'm Ty Pennington, here for Choice Home Warranty. They protect my home from expensive repairs, and they can do the same for you. No matter if it's your refrigerator, plumbing, or more than 20 other home systems and appliances, Choice Home Warranty has saved millions of homeowners a whole lot of money. For a low monthly fee, you get their nationwide network of trusted local technicians with plans that cover repairs and replacements done quickly and the right way. No more headaches searching for technicians. No more budget-breaking chaos. Just a peace of mind of having Choice Home Warranty at your service. Call Choice Home Warranty now and save big with their special offer of your first month free and free limited roof coverage. Call now.
Call Choice Home Warranty for your free personalized quote and to get your first month free. Call in the next 5 minutes, and as our special offer, you'll receive free limited roof coverage. Call now to lock in your rate and save big. Call 800-522-0122, 800-522-0122.
Discover the ancient secret to vitality and longevity with Puretang Black Ginseng. Crafted from premium 6-year-old Korean ginseng, each root is carefully nurtured for over 2,260 days, undergoing a traditional 9-round handcrafted process of steaming and drying to unlock full potency and absorption. Experience pure natural energy with Puretang Black Ginseng. Order now at puretang.com.
There's a whirlwind of emotion and activity going on in this painting. And there's chaos all around and threat from below. The wolves surrounding her, and they're anything but unmoved. They're moving all the time, and we sense that. But this little girl remains.
And for